Sportsline Podcast on CHCH. I'm Bubba O'Neil. Certainly appreciate you being with us. Folks, this podcast spends all kinds of time with many outstanding athletes, coaches, executives, and broadcasters that Southern Ontario has to offer. But today, we dig into the issues, and I certainly have the perfect person to square off with. It's the return of one of my favorites on the Sportsline Podcast, especially when we do have issues to discuss. For nearly 30 years, Scott Radley has informed, entertained, and sometimes provoked as a columnist at the Hamilton Spectator. In his second career at 900 CHML, he's mastering the ability to offer his unique perspective to create compelling talk radio on his very own Scott Radley Show. Now, whether it is news, politics, and best of all, sports, Scott Radley is always ready for a square-off. So coming in off the top rope like Rick Rude.
Ravishing Rick Rude. Have you had Ravishing Rick Rude show up in your social media all of a sudden? This last few days, I have not thought about why would I think about Ravishing Rick Rude? And all of a sudden, my social media has like 5 times he's popped up there. And I'm like, what's going on with Ravishing Rick Rude? All of a sudden, he's dead.
Well, I mean, I'm going to say he's long past, but like, I know you like to dabble in the wrestling.
A long time ago.
Really?
A long time, like back in the 80s, 90s, I knew some of them. But it's like, why Ravishing Rick Rude all of a sudden? Where's he come from? What's
you
going
might have
on?
typed up like Hamilton wrestling. You know, Hamilton has been a hotbed for many outstanding wrestlers.
I mean, if all
the
of a
missing
sudden,
link.
Well, if all of a sudden Val Venus starts showing up, I'm going to think someone was fiddling around with my computer and typing in something inappropriate, because that would be a series of.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I don't know what's going on.
You know what? Canada's top athlete of all time,
Iron Mike Sharp. I've got the T-shirt.
Iron Mike Sharp.
I've got the T-shirt. Iron Mike Sharp. Tragic story in the end. Fascinating guy, but yeah, Canada's greatest athlete.
I can't wait to have you back again for a chat on that one.
Wayne Gretzky might have something to say about that, but he was Canada's greatest athlete.
He really was. Hey, speaking of athletics, we love talking sports and love having you in to talk about sports on these podcasts. And I think there's some topics that we need to really dive in. You ready?
Absolutely. Let's go.
Let's get to it. Following losses to the Stampeders and a pair to the Saskatchewan Roughriders, the Hamilton Tiger Cats are 0-3 once again. Should fans and the league be surprised with this winless start, Scott?
See, my inclination is to say, okay, this is the 3rd straight year they've been 0-3, so, you know, history says no. But they got a new coach, they've got new receiving core, they've got a new defense. They had some games in there that I thought were winnable. That they should have won the first game, but for some drops. They should have won the second one, but for some drops. I don't know, Bubba. At a certain point, and I wrote this in my column after the game this week, at a certain point, however, you get to the thing where you say, well, they're 0-3 every year, so why not this year?
I feel like you want to get, especially based on the things you said there. New coach, new team, a little younger, some people that should be out there busting their butts wanting to impress, that we would get off to the quick start. But what I'm concerned about is sort of fan apathy. Like, here we go again. Yeah. And I just don't think, and I'll say this, and I think the coach would believe this, and the president would believe this, we don't want to get used to being 0-3. Yet, you know, you look at the last couple years, and look at the situation here. 0-3, 0-3, 0-4, 0-2.
Yeah, it's so the fan apathy is an interesting one, because we were talking about this the other day, and at the game, at the first home game that they played against Saskatchewan, we were up in the press box way, if anyone knows where we are, I mean, we got a duck for small planes that are coming overhead. And we're looking down on the fans, and we're looking, of course, at their backs because they're facing the field. And we could not see, we were almost playing a little game saying, find a jersey that the name on the back is of a current Ticat. There was Zambiazzi's, and there was Mosca's, and there was Moriali's, and Hitchcock's, and McManus's, and all the McMahon-I, I'm not sure. Anyway, it was really hard to find someone wearing a current Ticat jersey. And that speaks, I suppose, to merchandise sales, but it also says maybe something about who your audience is who's still there right now. It's not necessarily a brand new, backfilling, fresh audience. It's guys and women who have been around for a long time. You fix that, you start to change that by winning. And they haven't won a Grey Cup in 25 years, and they start every year like this. And let's not fool ourselves. This week against Ottawa, not a must-win game. It's June. But you don't win this one, you've got BC, Toronto, Edmonton, Montreal that follows. That's not a soft touch in the schedule. You've got to get something going. You've got to feel good about yourself and make something happen this week. So it's not must win, but it's really advisable to win this week.
I think the one, I want to say soft touch is the fact that there are two other 0-3 teams. Now, you can talk about Edmonton and the Elks about the fact that they're, kind of used to this same trend that's going on. Certainly the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are not used to being 0-3. And on top of that, they have all kinds of injuries. Dalton Schoen now, their fine wide receiver, put on the 6-game injury list. Zach Calero certainly not looking like himself. I don't think he has a touchdown pass, to be honest, through 3 weeks. So certainly their fan base, who have been spoiled over the years, they're right now blowing their tops right now. But 0-3 is just certainly not a good start, and we do get the old saying about the Canadian Football League, and I don't know, I'm beginning to wonder, is it important enough to even bring this up about the season doesn't start till Labor Day, but I just don't think you want to get a little equity, build some equity, so you don't have to be chasing so hard down the stretch like they did last year to get into the postseason. I mean, they won 5 in a row, I believe, to get into the postseason. But I feel like by the time you do get to the playoffs, you're kind of burned out.
Look so Montreal did it last year, so they've shown you can do it. You can be mediocre if that, get hot at the right time, roll through the playoffs, and win a Grey Cup. You can do it. But again, I'm looking at the schedule right now and saying this schedule is not easy. This schedule up until the middle of August is not a soft touch. And then you've got Labor Day and you got Toronto again. And then don't forget, as you get a little past that, you're saying, okay, well, if we get past that, then we've got Winnipeg and they're 0-3. So they'll be, does anybody think that by the time Winnipeg and Hamilton meet, that Winnipeg is still going to be at the bottom of the league? I think Winnipeg is just having a disappointing, difficult start, and they are good enough that they're going to figure stuff out. And it's Murphy's Law that Hamilton doesn't get them at their weak point. They'll get them when they've got some guys back from injury and they've figured it out again. There's really a couple of games between now and mid-September that you look at and you go, all right, I would say those are really expected wins for the Ticats. The way they've started, every other game, I'm not saying they can't win, but I don't think you expect them to win the way they've gotten going. And that's a tough place to be right now.
All right. After becoming a national story in the Canadian Football League last week, Tim White not having a great start to the season in this last contest. Game number 3, targeted 6 times, no receptions. What's going on with the multiple All-Star of the Tiger Cats?
Great question. The troubling part about this, and he talked to the media after the second game and said, people go through adversity. If you've never had adversity, it means you're never on the field. And he was bang on. It's true. But then game 3 comes, and at least 2 passes hit him right in the hands, and he dropped them. And there's something going on, and I don't mean nefarious. Whether it's just confidence or whether it's the fact that Bo Levi Mitchell may now have a new best friend with Shamar Bridges, who is looking like a guy you would want to throw the ball to a lot. I don't know. But Tim White has been probably the league's biggest disappointment so far. Now, remember, there's 15 games left. Guys have had slumps before in every sport. I don't expect that Tim White is going to have many games with 0 catches, a couple drops, and all that kind of stuff. I expect, based on history, that Tim White's going to figure it out and be just fine as the season goes on. But that said, Bubba, another game or 2 of this, and there's going to be some people wondering what is going on. A slump is a slump. If it persists, then you got to ask the question.
Well, look at those numbers there. I mean, targets 26 across 3 games. I think if I'm a wide receiver, I'm okay with that. But it's the 10 receptions. And as you said, one game with no receptions. And the fact that your game breaker has yet to get into the end zone, and you're completely correct in saying there are 15 more games left in the regular season schedule. And we have seen this with Tim White before, where there have been some numbers that, maybe didn't really look like all-star numbers. And then he rips off 200 yards receiving, 175, 150. It's been his history. But you're right. I'm wondering, with a new offensive coordinator and the fact that Bo Levi Mitchell is being told not to force the football. We had one game of it where he's looking to force the football a little bit, and we saw 3 interceptions in the second half of last Sunday's game against Saskatchewan. I don't think that's going to happen again. I actually thought Bo played okay in that game, believe it or not.
Well, 2 of the interceptions are deflected.
They're deflected, and and then one goes back into the end zone. It wasn't great. He wasn't great. I don't think he was horrible, right? No. There were games last year where I was like, Bo is horrible right now, right? But I thought he was okay. But yeah. I think confidence is a huge thing for wide receivers, and the best receivers in the National Football League and even the CFL, in some ways, maybe have the biggest heads, if you know what I'm saying here. They're just beaming with confidence. And if the ball's all of a sudden going to someone else, and you just said it, Bo maybe has a new best friend right now that he can rely on and feels comfortable with, that could play in his head a little bit.
I don't think, and I completely understand why it's on the board today and why you bring this up and why the question is asked. I think Ticat fans are asking the question. But I think after this discussion, you probably shelve this one till, say, Game 6. So a third of the way through the year. And if we're still having the discussion and Tim White is still struggling and still not putting up numbers and still dropping passes, that is enough of a season to say, okay, what's going on? 3 games, I say it's a very small sample size. It's a slump. It's not great.
Do you think the contract had anything to do with it?
Maybe that, how many athletes have we seen over the years where they sign a big contract and later they don't have a great start and later they say, yeah, it got into my head because I thought I had to do more because I got more money. Yeah. He hasn't talked about it, not to me, not that I've heard. Who knows? Who knows if that's playing on it? But at some point, what I fully expect to happen, and I'll be quite shocked if it doesn't, and again, that's when you bring this up again, is I fully expect, and maybe against Ottawa, because Ottawa's defense is let's use the word malleable.
What does that mean? What does that word mean?
They've looked better, but you've got chances against them. I wouldn't be at all shocked if Tim White goes off for 120, 130 yards this weekend, or not. But I don't believe that the guy has forgotten how to play football in the off season. That's all. I don't believe, and I don't believe that his hands have suddenly turned into 2 cinder blocks that can't catch a ball. He will catch the ball, and once he gets some confidence, I expect he will return to form. But again, let's check in a few more games.
NHL now. Game 7 of the Stanley Cup averaging, listen to these numbers, folks, 8.64 million viewers on CBC Sportsnet and TVA Sports, which is in Quebec. Excellent numbers. In the United States, 7.6 million viewers, and that number peaked in the third period at 10.3 million viewers. This is America we're talking about. That's the largest audience for an NHL game in 6 years.
And NBA, apparently. Bigger than any NBA playoff game.
Huge number. But yet, why, especially Canadians, why is Gary Bettman being booed?
Oh, it's a tradition now. I mean, Roger Goodell is booed when he goes out.
I'm not even just talking about, I'm just booed. Just overall, the people don't like the guy. Is he not doing, or at least doing great things for the sport of hockey?
Yeah, but again, it's the commissioner. It's the tradition with the commissioner. He shows up. I mean, Bud Selig used to get booed when he was doing baseball. I don't even remember if, the new commissioner gets booed. I haven't seen him much in public, but it's just the thing. It's the thing you do. But those numbers are wild. And I read somewhere that at one point the maximum number at 15 million Canadians watched part of that game, which is astonishing and makes you wonder, not to bring this back to around here, that was for the Edmonton Oilers. Can you imagine if switch the Oilers out of that game and put the Toronto Maple Leafs in that game with their audience, what the numbers would be. And, the encouraging thing, I think, about this is that there's been a lot of talk in recent weeks and months and years that hockey is starting to lose its place in the Canadian psyche and people are finding other things to do. This would, to me, clearly show that if you provide a good product, there is still plenty of interest in this country in hockey. Plenty.
But I think the National Hockey League know that, and I think they've leaned on that for a long, long time.
Taking advantage of that?
That's debatable, and I think this is why there are so many Canadians that, quite honestly, cannot stand Gary Bettman. I've talked to many of them. I think sometimes you are one of them, and the fact that they're kind of leaning the game or making the game more accessible for Americans. But I think if Americans are watching, if Americans are showing interest, I watch ESPN. I got ESPN. I've never seen, obviously because it's a property now for them, they are covering it just as much in the National Hockey League. And some of their hot take shows are also talking about it as well, too.
Yeah, they don't always pronounce the names right, but
no,
but at least
they're trying.
At least they're trying. And look, it's good news that the game is being grown down there. I do find it weird, and I know the Oilers were one goal away from winning the Stanley Cup. I do still find it weird, and I'm not throwing out a conspiracy theory or anything like that.
Here we go.
That no Canadian team has won in the Gary Bettman era. When he started, he began his term like a month before the Montreal Canadiens won in '93. But he had nothing to do with the NHL. He just sort of showed up, and that was the start. And since then, no Canadian teams, and I am not arguing that Bettman is telling the refs to fix the games. I am not suggesting that any of this conspiracy stuff is happening. I don't believe that. It's just a truly bizarre stat that the man has not given the cup since the first month of his time. He has not given the cup to a Canadian team. It's weird.
Well, I mean, Vancouver have had two opportunities.
Ottawa,
Montreal twice.
Yeah, no. They've been there. There's been
Calgary.
chances. Yeah, there's been chances. And that's why I don't think it's a conspiracy. I'm just saying it's weird. It's weird that after Canadian teams dominated forever, now they can't get there in any way. The one thing I will say about this, and again, it's not a conspiracy, but it's something that I think the NHL honestly should look into or should consider, although I very much doubt they ever would because there's no upside to the American teams. You look at a place like Florida or Arizona or Texas where the tax situation is vastly different. For the Montreal Canadiens, Ottawa Senators, Toronto Maple Leafs to sign a player for the same take-home pay is a huge additional amount of money, which means if you're competing for free agents and the guy goes, I can go to Florida, and if I make $4.5 million in Florida, that's the equivalent of $5 and a bit in Canada. Well, if you've got the same salary cap and the Canadian teams have to pay more to get those players, they are at a disadvantage. I would like to at least have them explore whether the salary cap should be tax adjusted for different markets.
Well, I mean,
but I don't know how you do it, and I don't know when you would do it, and I don't know. It may be impossible to do. I'd just like to see it explored because I think it would level the field. How are you going to do that,
Scott? I mean, that's a problem in baseball. That's a problem in the NBA.
There's only one team in baseball in Canada out of the States, so they don't really care about that.
But I'm just saying, though, but that's a state tax thing, is it not?
Yep.
Right? So other teams are being, have that issue, I would say, in the NBA and in Major League Baseball, right?
So that's what I'm saying. So if you look at it on a state-by-state basis,
right,
and say, let's say, I don't know what the number is, but let's say New York's taxes for a player are 30% higher than a player in Florida, and it's 50% higher.
The highest in the United States is the California teams.
All right. So so go there and say, the salary cap is a little higher for those teams because of taxes or something. Mm-hmm. They'll never do it because I don't think the owners certainly in the states that have the better tax situations, why would you give up your advantage? But I'm trying to go back to how could it possibly now be it'll be 32 years next year. How can it possibly be 32 years without a single Canadian team winning? Again, not arguing for a fix. It's not a fix. No one's fixed anything about this, but there is clearly something going on that makes it more difficult for the Canadian teams. There has to be. Otherwise, by fluke, somebody would have won it along the way.
Well, the Leafs had their chance in the COVID season, and they blew it, really. That was a wonderful opportunity for them
the Winnipeg Jets this year. Great regular season, best goalie in the league, couldn't stop a puck in the playoffs. I mean, teams have had their chances. Again, I'm not arguing. I know people are going to say, oh, you're saying, well, this is just to preserve the Leafs. There are 7 Canadian teams, and none of them have been able to get over the hump. There has to be some reason, and I'm not smart enough to know what that is. I'm not.
To your point, though, right, to the Florida argument, you think about Florida getting there back-to-back years. And
5. Tampa 3.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying Tampa have been really dominant at getting to at least a conference championship as a franchise. And, that's a good, people talk about, they kind of whine, and I know I've heard a lot of people saying, people in South Florida, they care about hockey. But I will say, if you go to the Gulf Coast, Tampa Bay is a legit hockey market. People care about their team and show up all the time, sellouts all the time, and they have a big arena.
I will say, just before you go on to the next topic, when you say about Florida being a market, I saw a video, I think on social media yesterday, and it was Matthew Tkachuk. It was from an apartment building or something.
That one. Bar.
That one. But no, this one, he was walking the cup across a road by the beach to get to the beach. And he's standing on the sidewalk waiting for traffic to stop, holding the Stanley Cup. You can go and find it. And nobody stops. And I'm like, could you imagine if the Leafs, Oilers, Senators, pick your Canadian team, had just won the cup and the captain is carrying the cup through the downtown? Can you imagine that no driver would stop his car and get out to take a picture? Who's the idiot with the giant silver thing? It was kind of amazing to me.
Oh, okay. Let's stick with the National Hockey League. And for the 6th time ever, the Conn Smythe Trophy was awarded to a player on the losing side of the Stanley Cup final. Oilers captain Connor McDavid won the award, but have failed to accept the honor. Scott, fair or foul?
Okay, so normally I would say sportsmanship would dictate that you show up and you collect the award. However, this was probably 5 minutes, 10 minutes after what is likely the worst disappointment of Connor McDavid's career, maybe his life, honestly, that he's won everything growing up. He's always been the best player. He's won every award except for the Stanley Cup, and you lose not in a blowout, in heartbreaking fashion, where 5 minutes before the end of the game, he has the puck on his stick and just can't tuck it in. Would have been the tying goal. I completely understand in this circumstance why Connor McDavid doesn't come back on the ice, put on a phony smile to get a trophy from Gary Bettman, while all the other Florida players are dancing around. I get it. I would normally say do the right thing. I absolutely will give the man a pass in this case because this was a unique circumstance.
You're right. It is a unique circumstance, as I had to include it in what I said there. Only the 6th time that this has ever happened of the losing team having the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. I like it. Scott, I think you go to an old saying, or an old broadcast partner of mine told me, you win with class, you lose with class. And the Conn Smythe Trophy has names of beautiful Hall of Famers. It is historical. It is an honor to win that award. And I think if you were to ask Connor McDavid 24 hours after that he said no, he would say that was a mistake. You suck it up, and you know what? You can be as bitter as you want on your face. In fact, I'm okay with that, looking at you and saying, and looking at the sadness or the disappointment on your face. But on behalf of the city of Edmonton, on behalf of the Edmonton Oilers franchise, you get out there. You're the greatest player of your era, and you get out there and accept that award, and then you skate off the ice. You don't even have to touch it. You go out there, you stand beside the trophy, shake Bettman's hand, and then you get out of there.
So, question for you. Do you think the Florida Panthers fans cared to see Connor McDavid get that trophy?
No, but I did.
Okay, but just a sec. So if fair enough. My point is, though, if the Florida Panthers fans don't care, they just want the Stanley Cup. You could have presented that award to Connor McDavid outside the Oilers dressing room and done the same thing. They
never do that, though. This is the way it's done.
I understand, but it's the way it's done because it's always to a guy on the winning team, except for the 6 times, as you've pointed out. So and they don't have a policy because it happens so infrequently. But I think that in future, you present it outside the guy's dressing room. I'm sure if you had done that, Connor McDavid would have stepped outside to accept it. You could have shown it on the screen.
What about the Edmonton Oilers fans, the thousands of them, not just 100, that actually took a flight and got to that game, right? That were just as disappointed as Connor McDavid was. They're to stand up and applaud. Thank you, Connor.
I'm pretty sure that if they were anything like all the fans in the moss pit, that they were gone the second that game ended. I don't know how many Oilers fans were still around 15 minutes later when they presented the award.
It was obvious he was going to win the award, no? Like, I mean, look at this. Look at the playoff he had.
Okay, it probably, and I would say sure. I mean, that's who my vote would have been for. Mm-hmm. But, awards have been given to weirder winners before for different things. I don't think Connor McDavid's going to assume he's going to win and sit on the bench and wait to hear his name. And then all of a sudden they call Bobrovsky and you're like, ooh, well, I guess I got to get out of here somehow now.
Right.
You know what the bigger issue to me is about this, Bubba, is not even the Conn Smythe Trophy. I want to stick with McDavid for a second. After this was over, part of the disappointment, I think, is I'm not sure Connor McDavid is going to win a Stanley Cup now. This is as close as he's been. It took him 9 years. They've got 1 more year left before Draisaitl is going to be a free agent and is going to need a huge increase because he is significantly underpaid by NHL standards. Bouchard is going to need a big pay increase because he's underpaid. They've got a ton of unrestricted and restricted free agents this year. They're going to have to do some work. If they don't make it back to the Cup final this next year,
right,
you may find yourself in the position where you're either without Draisaitl because you've decided you can't afford to have 2 guys like that and get in a Leaf situation, or you keep him and you now have the Leaf situation where you have no depth. I feel terrible because Connor McDavid, as the greatest player of his era, we want the greatest players to win championships. I looked at this and thought, he's 27 now. Next year, so he's 28. If they don't win, there's going to have to be some rebuilding, something. I don't know that he wins one, which would be a shame, which would be horrendous for the game.
Well, you're right. I mean, the Draisaitl deal's got to get done this summer. At some point in the summer, I don't think you want to get these things going into the season, and nor do you want to wait for him to become a free agent, and then because it's a wild card after that. Mm-hmm. But you know what? Connor McDavid is the year after Draisaitl, so everyone's going to have to get taken care of here. And you're right. The fear is that they run into a Maple Leaf situation where 4 of 23 guys are getting 44%
Nurse,
of
Bouchard, Draisaitl, McDavid. There's your 4 guys.
The only thing, Scott, I will say that is because of the new contract in the United States with the hockey being on TBS and ESPN, the Sportsnet deal, I believe, only has 1 more year left. There's a belief that the salary cap, which is 85 and change or whatever, could go up to as much as $100 million. $100 million
but even
in just 2 years. Right?
Even if it does, right? And you're right, that means more money, but most of the guys, every time we now see players, especially at the top end, we're not talking so much about how much they're making. We're talking about percentage of the cap.
Right.
And so even if the cap goes up by 10%, well, that just means every free agent is going to want 10% more because the cap has gone up by 10%. It's not like new money that one team gets to find. And so, as I say, I fear for him that this may be the closest he gets. And lots went wrong for Edmonton this year, at the start of the year especially. But there were a lot of things that fell into place pretty nicely. I mean, regular season playoffs combined, what do you say the percentage is that Zach Hyman is going to score 70 goals in a year again? 0. Sorry, I love Zach Hyman.
Yeah.
He's not scoring that many goals again. The fact that, Skinner found his game and became a credible NHL goalie that almost won you a cup. I'm not gambling on Stuart Skinner becoming a guy that is going to be Patrick Roy or Martin Brodeur. There were a lot of things during the regular season as they got into that big winning streak and the playoffs that went well for them. You have to have a lot of stuff go right to get anybody, and not the Oilers, anybody. You have to have a lot of things go right to get to the finals. And they've got, in my mind, they've got 1 year left to do it, or a little bit of pixie dust and magic after that. I don't love their chances. I don't love his chances.
Well, I mean, on the exterior, I mean, the Vancouver Canucks, don't tell me they're not peeved off about getting eliminated by the Oilers. The Dallas Stars, who have been consistently near the top of the Western Conference every single season for at least the last 3 or 4 years.
Colorado,
oh my goodness, Colorado. Vegas, who are seemingly there every year. And then there's going to be one surprise.
There always is, and you know what? Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard to get there. Look, we're talking in Hamilton. We're surrounded by Leaf fans. They get it. They understand. They've not had the success. Here's the thing. I don't know if it makes it any better for Leaf fans to know that the Stanley Cup champion this year was from the Atlantic Division, their division. Last year, the finalist was in the East, was from the Atlantic. The 3 previous years was the Atlantic. In fact, one of those years was 2 Atlantic teams because it was in the bubble. Boston was before then.
Yep.
The Leafs have not done it. It's hard because there are great teams that you have to beat. The Leafs have not managed to beat those teams, but it just shows you what any team is up against to do this again. As I say, I really hope, for the sake of hockey, for his sake, I hope McDavid someday gets to hoist the cup, because I think it's better for the game when you have that, and when you can have those clips down the road of the greatest players ever hoisting the cup. But I don't know where it's going to happen.
Marcel Dion.
Great, yeah.
And
Dan Marino. I mean, if you want to go into football,
Dan Marino, goodness.
There's guys who are the greatest players who just didn't have the circumstance that allowed it to happen. And no matter how great you are, we saw in that, look, the games 4 and 5 particularly, Connor McDavid dominated.
Took over.
And you saw the impact he could have, but you also then saw, I think, Florida and their coaching staff and everyone else say, okay, enough of that. If we're going to get beaten, you see this in football all the time. We'll do this and this. If you're going to beat us, it's not going to be your star. It's going to be your other guys. I really believe that Florida, especially after Game 5, said, enough of that. We're going to play to not let Connor McDavid beat us. And if someone else is going to, fill your boots, but we're not going to go down with Connor McDavid having 4 consecutive 4-point games.
Kidding, dude.
And the last 2 games, he was basically, for large chunks of it,
he was
shut down.
Sticking with hockey and money. According to Daily Face-Off hockey insider Frank Saravelli, extending Mitch Marner is not on the table for the Maple Leafs, and that's the player saying that and his people. Yet Saravelli says that Marner, who has a full no-movement clause, wants to remain a Leaf. What's going to be the end result here?
We were just talking about the Oilers. This is one of the really interesting things, and I wonder if part of what the Leafs are doing, I don't know if they're doing this or not, but if Leon Draisaitl re-ups with Edmonton, what's he going to sign for? And does he demand the most amount of money that he could possibly extract out of Edmonton, or does he say, I'm going to be a little humble, and you know what? Connor McDavid's making, $13.8, something like that in his new contract. I'll take 11. It's less than I am worth, but I want to leave a little money to help our team. I don't know if he's going to do that. Mm-hmm. But if Leon Draisaitl signs a contract that is a little below market value, it is going to put an awful lot of pressure on Mitch Marner, because now one of the best playoff performers of our era would be taking a little less. How is Marner then going to stand up and say, oh, I deserve more than Leon Draisaitl? That's what the Leafs, I bet, are absolutely hoping. Now, I also don't believe, though, that Marner is going to accept less than Nylander. And that's a big deal. And I mean, there almost comes a certain point where if you're the Leafs and you don't sign Marner, I know he walks away, I know you get nothing for him, but that's not true, Bubba. That's not really true, because what you get for him if he walks away is $11 million in salary cap space to fill that roster spot with two maybe really great defensemen. You know, you can. Yes,
didn't the Raptors think the same thing?
Yeah, well,
and it's buried them. Let's be honest. It's made them bottom out.
But you've got to make the right choices. Right. You've got to sign the right guys.
Right.
You don't just take $11 million and say, "I'll give it to Bubba and Scott, and we're good." That's not that doesn't happen. But if you sign the right guys and you have the money now to spend it, so letting him walk is not a complete loss, because in this salary cap era, you do get something for that. It's not a great player. And in fact, the irony is, let's say you trade him. We've heard all kinds of trade rumors, even though you're right, he has a no-move clause, so none of these may have any merit whatsoever. But let's say you trade him for two guys, and their salary combined takes up his. Are you sure that those two guys you're trading for are as good as two guys you could sign as free agents a year later? I would almost, at this point, not extend him, this now anyway, see if Craig Berube can do something with him that Sheldon Keefe couldn't. See if you can have a new coach, a new word, a new direction, a new motivator, whatever, and create a new, slightly different Mitch Marner. And then if he does, okay, now we'll talk. And if he comes out and he's the same guy, then you go, we're going to trade him for salary cap space. That's what we're going to trade him for.
Well, you're right. This is it. Like, this is the end of the line. And like, there's the reality of the fact that if you just let him play out his contract, there is, in essence, 1 year that the Maple Leafs will have under this sort of Auston Matthews era with his buddy on his wing, and of course Nylander driving another line. Like, this is the last we're ever going to see of this group. So if this is the swan song, let's see what happens. It could be fun.
Let's see if Berube could do something. And we didn't even include the whole thing, because if at the end of this year Berube doesn't, if he can't, if Marner is just Marner and Marner walks at the end of the year, well, there's almost $11 million. And remember, John Tavares is up after this year. There's 11. So now, again, you haven't traded them officially, but you've essentially exchanged those two guys for $22 million in salary cap, plus whatever the increase is. If you believe that Treliving is a guy who can build a team and knows what he's doing,
I think he knows what he's doing.
Well, okay, everyone can have their thought. I'm not saying he doesn't. I'm simply saying, a GM, if you believe in your general manager and you hand a GM of a decent team $22 million to go out and fill those spots that you need filled, that's intriguing. That is an intriguing position to be in. Doesn't help this year necessarily, but the year after, that would be a very interesting place to be if you had that kind of money and the prestige, maybe, of the Leafs, more taxes, but, to lure some guys here.
And to your point, which I think kind of supports it in a sense, because this is the hockey mecca of the world, we'll say, and it's Toronto, and you can always put a spin on things. If you're Brad Treliving, you could say, you know what, we're going to take that salary space and we're going to create a whole new, better Maple Leaf team, because those guys didn't want to be with us.
Yep.
Like, you can, he didn't want to be a Maple Leaf. Like, you can build that up, and then, of course, fans are going to say, yeah, he didn't. He didn't want to be. He did not waive the no trade where we could have maybe gotten something. He screwed us in essence. So that can be played up.
$22 million, and it'll be more than that, as I say, because the salary cap should increase. You could do an awful lot to change the look of your team, assuming the GM signs the right guys, because you could also completely screw up your team for a generation if you spend that one chance, if you spend it on the wrong guys. And you bring in, look, I'll tell you a guy that I love, because I used to play here in Hamilton and I loved covering him and I loved talking to him, Mike Komisarek. You know, when the Leafs brought in Commissaric and gave him all that money from Montreal, he was the wrong guy for the wrong place. It didn't, not him as a human being. It was not the right fit. And you spent all that money to do it. If you can find the right fits, that's a lot of money to do some fixing with.
I know this is near and dear to your heart, so I'm really looking forward to your response here. Blue Jays. Do I need to tell you? They're last in the American League East. Currently, as of this taping, they're 6.5 games out of the third and final wild card. As headlined by the Toronto Star today, columnist Gregor Chisholm wrote, "The club needs a fresh start and new ideas beginning at the top." Agree or disagree, Scott?
Okay, I'm taking a deep breath. You and I, we've known each other a long time. 5 years, 6 years, I don't know how long ago it was, you and I have been talking, and I have been consistently saying Ross Atkins is not the guy to do this. And it is, look, I'm not right on everything. I like to believe I am. I like to tell people I am. I'm not. On this one, I am right. Ross Atkins has made a complete hash of this franchise. They have no capacity to win at the major league level. All their players are disappointing. All their players. There's not a guy on that team right now that you would look at and say, that guy's a star who's at, even Bichette, who should be great, isn't. Guerrero isn't. Springer is horrible right now. Their pitching staff is all in the infirmary. They can't get anybody out. Their farm system is atrocious. It's a disaster. This team is a complete mess, and that falls entirely at the feet of Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro, who took a team that they inherited that was one of the most exciting teams that Toronto fans loved. They loved that team in 2015. They come in here, immediately start whining that Alex Anthopoulos gutted the farm system, to which I say, show me one guy that Anthopoulos traded in 2015 to build that team when he got David Price and he got Tulowitzki and all those. Show me one guy that was in the Jays farm system that he traded that's become a star. Alex Anthopoulos worked magic to convince teams to take mediocre prospects and turn it into a great team. And yet that was what Ross Atkins was complaining about and Mark Shapiro was complaining about, which right off the bat should tell you, if they're looking at those guys, none of who turned out, and saying those were future stars, that should tell you right there about their talent evaluation abilities. And now you have got no draft picks of note. You've got no team of note. You've got no power. What was that in deep dive and the internal improvement and all that stuff? It was all a load of horse pucky. It was all a load of crap. They did nothing. They flew in, what's his name, from Dragon's Den on a plane instead of Shohei Ohtani. They did nothing. They've done nothing. And this is on them. And this is their mess, and this is their team. And Mark Shapiro is not going anywhere because Rogers likes the fact that he builds nice facilities. He built a training facility in Dunedin, and he's done okay rebuilding the Rogers Center. I've applauded him for that. But Ross Atkins has done a horrendous job.
That's his buddy. Like, he personally he brought him in.
Who's the baseball executive? Who's the general manager active in baseball right now who you could point to and say that guy has done a worse job than Ross Atkins? Who has produced less?
They've all been fired.
They've got an enormous salary cap. Not a cap. They've got an enormous salary. They should be one of the best.
Over $200 million.
They are horrible. And that's on Ross Atkins. You can't point at anybody else. And now, and here's the worst part about this now. Even if if he stays, I don't trust him to start making trades because nothing he's done has worked. Well,
Scott, I got to interrupt there because that's the big deal right now, right? Yeah. This is where we've gotten to. Based on it, like what did I say? 6.5 out of the wild card, last in the AL East. This team's not going anywhere. Like, it's a pipe dream that they're going to make the playoffs. They'll have to go on some crazy run, and then they'll have to leapfrog like 6 teams to even get into the wild card. That's the tough part, right? So we're looking at a July 30th 30th trade deadline with guys like Gosman and Kikuchi. I mean, if you want to get Trey Turner, there's a lot of players that the Blue Jays can trade and possibly get something for. But if we don't want Atkins and Shapiro running the team, are you going to trust them to try and fix this?
Well, we're going to see if they trust them or not. I wouldn't, because there's been no evidence. Maybe, okay, so who did you say? Who was the pitcher you just said?
Gosman.
Gosman. All right, Gosman was a good signing. I'll give him the credit for Gosman. He's not been great this year, but I'll give him the credit for a Gosman signing, and Kikuchi has worked out pretty well. But considering all the moves you make as a general manager of a baseball team, pointing to 2 is not a great record. And so, no, I look, and here's the problem now. There's a lot of problems. Here's the biggest problem. In a year, you have both Vlad Guerrero and Bo Bichette coming up as free agents. You have to figure out what you're going to do with them. What do you do with them right now? They're both going to want big money. Do you believe that, 2 things? Do you believe that Vladimir Guerrero is going to become a star? Because right now he's an okay, reasonably good Major League Baseball player. He's got a great name. But do you believe that he is going to be a guy who rises to be one of the all-time greats, like currently?
We were told that's what was that.
Right?
Yeah, we were told.
Is he going to be that? Do you believe that? Is Bo Bichette, another guy with a great last name, a great resume, great family history? Do you believe that he is going to be one of the top players in the game? Because that's the kind of money I expect they're going to want. And if
someone will play Vladdy anywhere in the vicinity of $45 to $50 million a year.
Could be. And you want to know something? He might go there and he might become that star. And that's, of course, the terror if you're the Blue Jays, that we let this guy go or trade him.
Especially if he goes to the Yankees.
So you've got the question of, do we want to lock up all that money and risk that they don't become that? The second part is, this team is nowhere close to contending right now, and it'll probably take a few years at least to get back to the point where it is competitive. And I'm not talking about competitive like getting the 3rd wild card spot. Who cares? Who cares? I think Blue Jay fans say, we want to be in the discussion that we could win a World Series. And they are so far from that right now that it's unbelievable, because they have nobody in the farm. So if you sign these guys, you're paying for their peak years when your team is not competitive. So are you better just to deal them and try and get somebody back that can help you build a little more quickly, but again, with the fear that they go to the Dodgers or the Yankees or the Red Sox or wherever, and they find it and they become these enormous stars, and now you're the idiots who traded them away.
Here's the thing, Scott, and we had Fred Anderton here. You know Fred very, very well.
Baseball with Fred, Little League Baseball with Fred.
Oh, there you go. Yep. So, and he spent the better part of almost
way better baseball coach than I was.
He's spent the better part of almost 3 decades covering the team, going to spring training, and being the reporter for CHCH, and with so close to the Blue Jays, and the time when they were always competitive and very, very good teams. And he's all over this. He's like, these guys gotta go, right? But if you make these trades, you're going to get prospects back. You're going to get draft picks back. Okay, so here's the deal here. You're going to lose a lot of these big names. You've spent 2 off seasons rebuilding Rogers Center, putting in more than almost $1 billion into freshening up this facility. It's going to be 20,000, 17,000 people if this team can't compete. Like, is Rogers ready for that?
But they're not competing now. They're terrible now.
But this is what I'm saying. They're terrible right now, but they've foresold a lot of tickets, right? If you get into that, if they trade away the team, there's going to be no one in the ballpark.
And if they keep the team, if your star, if the guy that you have to hang those giant posters of outside the building is George Springer next year, who has some of the worst stats of everyday players in all of the game, or Turner, or whoever. Like, who's the star of this team right now that people are coming to see? And you can say it's Guerrero, but they're not coming to see him at this point because he's not that good right now. I go back to my point that I started this with about Anthopoulos. If Ross Atkins is the guy that you are entrusting to make trades of veterans to bring in young talent. He's the guy who thought the Jays farm system was flush with star players that Anthopoulos purged. And none of those guys have become anything in the major leagues. If that's his talent evaluation, I don't want him within 100 miles of making these trades. And I don't know how true Moneyball was, but I remember in Moneyball a few of those conversations that Brad Pitt had with Shapiro on the phone. I don't know if I want him making any of these trades either. He was getting fleeced left, right, and center. Again, I don't know how true that is, but the point is I don't trust right now. If you're a Jays fan, I'm sure you don't trust either of these guys. Here's what I proposed the other day, and it was tongue-in-cheek, but the more I think about it, the more I think it would actually be a really good idea.
This is going to be fun.
Schneider clearly is not the manager of the future for this team.
Ugh.
I think Ross Atkins has made enough of a mess of this team that he should have to go into the dugout and manage the rest of this season and be the guy who answers the questions after every game and stands in front of the media and makes the decisions and can't hide and do his once every quarter of the season press conferences. Shapiro should say, get a uniform on. We'll find one your size. This season is done. You made this team. You baked this cake. Now go eat it. And be the guy up front every single day. I would love to see that, although it would be an amazing achievement in public speaking to hear a man for the course of 4 months say billions of words and not any of them make sense in English, because that's what Atkins does. He talks in baseball gibberish and jargon and stuff that, I don't even know what he's saying half the time, and I don't think he knows what he's saying half the time. But I think it would be a great thing to say, okay, it's not Schneider right now. You go do it. This is you. You made this team. You brought this team together. You keep saying you're optimistic about this team. Do it. What do you think?
All I know is it's a collaborative decision. That's his line.
Well, if he also did that, he wouldn't be able then to dump these stupid decisions to pull Barrios out of a playoff game, although they're going to be so far from a playoff game, they won't be able to find it with a compass. But he would then have to answer for some of these decisions that I still believe Schneider didn't make that decision on his own. I don't think anyone believes that.
Schneider's a puppet. I hate saying that about him.
But
he's a grown man with a family and kids, and he's got a good job. But he's a puppet.
There's nobody on earth who believes that John Schneider alone came up with that decision and decided to pull a pitcher that was doing that. That came from
collaborative decisions.
It came from all over the place. It came from all different parts of the organization,
and a computer too. And a computer, but spits out stats.
Okay, I know we got to move on. We can't do this forever, but that's one other thing about this. I have no issue with analytics. I think analytics serve a valuable purpose in every sport. But I think a lot of sports and some managers, and I would put Ross Atkins in this category from what I see, have lost the capacity to use analytics as a tool, and it's become the only tool. And that's a problem. There is still a place for the eye test and for knowing what a guy is made of. And, go back to the Stanley Cup playoffs for a second. There are guys on both those teams that were in the finals who are not star players. They're not analytics darlings, but you would want them on your team because of stuff they bring and things they add to the locker room and things they'll do that don't really show up on the stats sheets, but you want guys like that. But analytics don't allow for that. And it seems to me that what the Jays have done has become driven so heavily by analytics that there doesn't seem to be a lot of room for the other parts of the game. And it doesn't work. Clearly, it's not working. Maybe you luck out every once in a while. And again, Moneyball, that the movie, and it's a movie.
The movie.
It's a movie, but
they never won.
No. But remember one thing about that too. Moneyball and that whole idea. Why did that become a book? Why did that become a movie? Because it was unique. Because Billy Beane was the guy who was doing something very different from everyone else. Now everybody's doing it. And so when one guy does it and it's unique, you can find nuggets and diamonds in the rough that other people, everyone's looking for the same thing now. and not everyone can find them. So now, okay, what are we going to do? I think the analytics thing, in a lot of ways, for a lot of teams, I won't say it's ruined sports. Sports is not ruined. But there are times when I despise analytics, that it's just become too much about playing a game on your computer and not playing a game on the field. These are still real live human beings. When Atkins talks about, I don't know, pick whatever of the idiotic, stupid things.
Velo,
whatever.
Spin rate.
Expected run production value. I mean, I'm making stuff up now. Baseball.
Launch angle.
Yeah, baseball, though, ultimately, you can come up with every stat you want. It's still decided by real runs scored by real people on a real diamond in the real world. You can have all the numbers you want, and if they don't add up to scoring runs and preventing runs in real life,
wins and losses,
it's useless. And right now, that's what it is. It's useless.
Let's end up on this and go back to the Canadian Football League. Edmonton Elks quarterback McLeod Bethel Thompson, he's sounding off about his team having to play on just 4 days of rest, claiming that the CFL's head office don't care about player safety and that there's a lack of leadership in the league. Oh, your thoughts?
Didn't the kickers all get suspended for talking about microchips in the footballs? There's got to be a suspension coming, or a fine coming here, right?
The big $250 fine.
Yeah,
is what
really.
They got.
So I'm not going to disagree with the fact that a 4-day in football, in professional football, that 4 days between games is a little goofy. It really is. I mean, even for people who don't watch the CFL, I would say someday, if you can, go down to field level. Don't watch on TV. Go down to field level, and you'll see these are large men who are, many of them, either enormous on the line or jacked. And they are running at high velocity and crashing into each other. And it's James Butler the other day was talking after the first game for the Ticats this year, when he had that great first game, and he hadn't played in a while, didn't play a game in the preseason, and we were asking him in the press conference after, how do you feel? He goes, well, the same I feel after every game. I feel like I've been in a car accident because I got much bigger guys smushing me. And I get it. I understand that 4 days, by the time you have a day off, maybe two, to rest your body, a day of prep, and then you got to travel potentially to another team. That's, I get it. I get his point. You probably can't say this because the league gets cranky about this, and saying there's no leadership or the league doesn't care about you. That's jumping the shark a little bit. But the 4-day thing, I'm with them on that one.
Well, and you know what? You do look at the schedule. There are some teams, I believe, if you look at it carefully, may play as much as 3 games in about 18 days. Like, every team's going to kind of go through this one little portion of the schedule where you're playing. The games are coming hot and heavy. And if you're right, if you add in some travel, I mean, who knows? I mean, you're talking about finely tuned athletes, and these guys are in the unbelievable shape. But you're right. Football is a little bit different than playing baseball every single day, right? You're right. You're running into a truck after 3 hours of football.
Now, that said, and we've talked a lot about hockey on this show. Let's just, if we're wrapping, let's wrap with this, because I am perpetually and constantly and annually blown away by what hockey players, NHL players do to go through the grind. Those guys who make it to the finals, when you start to get the injury reports, last year when Tkachuk played with a broken sternum, and guys, there's rumors that a couple of guys had broken ribs and block shots with their feet, and now you've got a bone broken or something. Like,
there's a guy in Vegas, he had no spleen, like a spleen issue.
Well, okay,
Mark Stone.
Yeah, Mark Stone. I'm sorry, I'm not doubting Mark Stone. The fact that he recovers every year just in time for the first game of the playoffs makes it a little suspect. But regardless, we'll leave that aside for today. What these guys playing generally every second night, I know the finals got stretched out a bit, but playing every second night, and what they do, I give full marks to football players and what Bethel Thompson was saying. I give full marks to football players, but there is nobody on planet Earth, in my mind, tougher than hockey players during the Stanley Cup playoffs. There just isn't.
Well, and the hard part is that they're back. The regular season starts in 3 months. Like 3 months. That's it. They can go up to the lake and hang out for about a month, and then they're going to start training again.
Yeah.
Incredible stuff. Hey, what a Sportsline podcast. It's been fantastic. Scott, as I said, I knew this was going to be a good one. Some real provocative things to talk about. Obviously, the baseball one ticked you off the most. And I think, you're no different than any Blue Jay fan. I mean, there are a number in this building that work at CHCH, and they're frustrated. Like, they really are.
It's been so predictable.
Right. Yeah.
That's the problem. This is not like all of a sudden they fell off the table this year. It's been predictable. They haven't drafted well. Most of their signings have not panned out. Mm-hmm. And Ross Atkins talks like he's got a computer chip in his brain feeding him random words during press conferences that you sort of go, wait a second, he just talked for half an hour and I don't know what he just said. What did he just say?
Think about it right now. Their top prospects are with the team right now. And then the top one is busted 80 games for drugs.
We didn't even get into that. But he was looking for fertility, right? He just wanted to be a fertile dude.
These players are explained. Their agents know. As a player, I mean, we're really going. Like the players can go seek out a team, their team doctor, their agent, the league. It's written in manuals. It's all you have to do is check. Like, no offense. Martinez is a young kid, and I don't like coming down on him, but really, come on.
Well, if he's going to be off for 80 days, I hope the little boys are swimming well in the meantime, because that's what he was trying to do it for, apparently.
He's got extra time on his hands.
He's got some time 80 days, 80 game suspension. He's got time to test that fertility now.
We've run out of time. Scott, thanks for joining us.
See ya.
That's your Sportsline podcast for the day. And as you've just seen and heard, we love talking sports, especially if there's some crazy stuff to talk about. If you do know of an athlete, team, or event to promote, the Sportsline podcast do want to hear from you. Got a great one coming up tomorrow. Please hit that thumbs up, like, and subscribe button. And if you do have something to say, please comment. For the wonderful people that make the Sportsline podcast possible, thank you so very much. And we'll see you tomorrow.